Since all you can do is look at girls. All right, slave. Go ahead and look.
Hollywood has always celebrated toughness, but some stars didn't have to act it. They lived it. These were men who carried real scars, fought real battles, and turned pain into power on screen. Long before CGI or stunt doubles, they endured prison yards, war zones, broken bones, and near-death moments that shaped their every move. Their toughness wasn't scripted, it was earned. Here are 10 of the toughest actors in Hollywood history, the ones who didn't just play heroes, they were them in real life. 1. Robert Mitchum, the drifter who didn't need to pretend. Before Hollywood ever rolled the cameras, Robert Mitchum had already lived several lifetimes worth of hardship. At just 16, he was sentenced to a Georgia chain gang, not for fame or rebellion, but for trying to survive the Great Depression. He hopped freight trains, boxed under fake names for food, dug ditches, and mined coal just to keep going. Every scar on his face, every calm stare, every shrug of indifference, it was all real. When he finally broke into Hollywood, Mitchum didn't try to impress anyone. He wasn't performing toughness. He was toughness. Even a 1948 drug arrest couldn't shake him. He did his 60 days in jail, walked out without apology, and went straight back to work. His co-stars said there was something unsettling about him, not because he was loud, but because he was silent. Mitchum had the calm of a man who'd fought real battles and didn't need to prove a thing. Director Edward Dmytryk once said, "You didn't direct Mitchum. You just kept the camera rolling and hoped he didn't knock someone out." Robert Mitchum didn't act like he'd been through hell. He had, and that quiet danger became his trademark. 2. Charles Bronson, the silent force forged in fire. Before Charles Bronson became the face of cinematic vengeance, he was a boy covered in coal dust. Born into crushing poverty as one of 15 children in a Pennsylvania mining family, Bronson was already working underground by the age of 10. Those early years, dark, suffocating, and brutal, shaped both his body and his soul. The hard labor carved the stoicism that later made him Hollywood's ultimate quiet, tough guy. When World War II began, Bronson traded the mines for the skies. He joined the U.S. Army Air Forces as a B-29 tail gunner, flying deadly bombing missions over Japan. He survived direct combat, was wounded in action, and earned a Purple Heart before returning home to pick up whatever jobs he could find. Cook, onion picker, part-time boxer. Fame wasn't his goal. Survival was. By the time he reached the screen, directors quickly realized Bronson didn't act tough. He simply was. His punches looked real because they were. His silences carried weight because they came from a man who had already faced death. When death threats arrived after his role in Death Wish, the studio offered him protection. Bronson just laughed, saying, "I've lived too long to be scared now." No bravado, no ego, just quiet, controlled power. Charles Bronson didn't perform masculinity. He embodied it, one steely glance at a time. 3. John Wayne, the Iron Cowboy who refused to fall. John Wayne didn't earn his reputation by playing cowboys. He became one through sheer endurance. Long before the swagger, the hat, and the Hollywood legend, Wayne was a working-class kid who learned toughness the hard way. He hauled props, built sets, and did backbreaking labor around film studios before anyone knew his name. He wasn't handed anything. He earned it with grit, sweat, and pain. That toughness never left him. During the filming of The Alamo, Wayne cracked several ribs after a horse stunt went wrong. Instead of halting production, he simply wrapped his torso, took painkillers, and kept shooting. His pain tolerance bordered on unreal. Years later, when cancer took one of his lungs and 4 ribs, he returned to film The Sons of Katie Elder as if nothing had happened. His attitude was simple: keep moving, no matter what. But perhaps the most tragic and revealing chapter came during The Conqueror, a movie filmed near a nuclear testing site in Utah. Radiation exposure from the location would later cause cancer in nearly half the cast and crew, including Wayne himself. He never blamed anyone, never complained, and kept working through the agony. When a director offered him a stunt double after surgery, Wayne glared and said, "Either I do my own stunts or you get someone else." That wasn't a line from a script. That was who he was. Even his political rivals respected his courage. As Kirk Douglas once said, "You could disagree with everything John believed in, but you couldn't question his toughness." John Wayne didn't just act like a hero. He lived like one. Battered, scarred, but utterly unbreakable. 4. James Cagney, the street fighter with a dancer's precision. Before James Cagney became one of Hollywood's most electrifying stars, he was a scrappy kid fighting to survive the brutal streets of Manhattan's Lower East Side. At just 5'5", Cagney wasn't built for intimidation, but he made up for it with lightning-fast reflexes, raw aggression, and an iron will. He learned to fight not for sport, but for survival. Every punch he threw on screen came from years of real street brawls, not choreography. What made Cagney unique was the contrast, a man who could explode with violence one moment, then move with the grace of a dancer the next. He trained in professional dance, and that rhythm translated into the sharp, precise way he fought on film. Directors loved it because his movements weren't just convincing, they were art in motion. As director Raoul Walsh once said, "Jimmy knew how to throw a punch better than any actor I ever worked with because he'd thrown plenty of real ones." Cagney's power wasn't about size or noise, it was about control. Bob Hope famously joked, "Cagney was the kind of guy who'd knock you down, then help you up and buy you a drink." That balance of ferocity and kindness defined him. He didn't need to prove he was tough. Everyone who met him already knew. Even as he aged, that intensity never faded. It simply focused, coiled, precise, and dangerous when provoked. James Cagney wasn't Hollywood's idea of a tough guy. He was the real New York version. Fast, fiery, and always ready to strike first. 5. Anthony Quinn, the rebel who carried the world on his back. Anthony Quinn's life didn't begin in comfort. It began in chaos. Born during the Mexican Revolution, his earliest memories were of fleeing gunfire and watching soldiers storm through the streets. When his family escaped to America, they landed in the slums of East Los Angeles, where survival meant working before you could dream. By 9, Quinn was already hauling meat in a butcher shop and mixing cement on construction sites. Childhood wasn't gentle. It was training for endurance. When money ran out, he turned to professional boxing. There were no stuntmen, no cameras, just real punches, blood, and hunger. That's where he earned his famously broken nose, which later became part of his rugged charm on screen. His strength was legendary. On the set of Zorba the Greek, he carried massive logs across a beach that usually required 2 men. Not for show, but because the scene needed doing. And at 46, he performed his own cliff-climbing stunts for the guns of Navarone, ignoring insurance warnings and laughing off danger. Yet, beneath the muscles and grit was something deeper: emotion. Quinn could shift from raw power to deep vulnerability in a heartbeat. He wasn't afraid to cry on screen, to love fiercely, or to show pain honestly. That blend of strength and sensitivity made him rare. A man who could embody both warrior and poet in one frame. Anthony Quinn didn't pretend to be tough. He was tough. Forged in revolution, tempered by labor, and softened only by the humanity that made him unforgettable. 6. Kirk Douglas, the man who refused to break. Kirk Douglas wasn't born into Hollywood privilege. He clawed his way there through sheer defiance. The son of impoverished immigrant parents, he grew up hungry, angry, and determined to escape poverty's grip. From a young age, he worked odd jobs to support his family, selling snacks to mill workers and wrestling with the weight of survival. That same hunger drove him all the way to a wrestling scholarship in college, where pain wasn't something to avoid, but to master. When World War II erupted, Douglas enlisted in the U.S. Navy, serving aboard submarine chasers that hunted enemy vessels. These missions were some of the most dangerous in the war, often ending in explosions and death. Douglas was injured in the line of duty and medically discharged, but instead of seeking pity, he pushed forward, channeling that wartime discipline into his acting career. On screen, he was relentless. In Spartacus, he trained like a real gladiator, taking real hits and performing his own grueling stunts. When he was seriously injured after a fall on set, he returned to filming within 48 hours. His resilience bordered on the impossible, but his greatest test came off-screen. At 72, Douglas survived a horrific helicopter crash that killed 2 others. Doctors doubted he'd walk again, yet within months he did. Then, years later, a devastating stroke stole his speech. Most would have retired quietly, but Douglas fought through years of therapy, relearned to speak, and wrote a book about his recovery. Director Stanley Kubrick once said, "When Kirk decided something was going to happen, it happened." That was no exaggeration. Kirk Douglas wasn't defined by fame. He was defined by the fire that refused to die, no matter how many times life tried to extinguish it. 7. Lee Marvin, the soldier who brought war to the screen. Before Lee Marvin ever stepped onto a movie set, he had already stared death in the face. As a young Marine during World War II, he fought through some of the bloodiest island battles in the Pacific. On Saipan, he was hit by machine gun fire that tore through his back and severed his sciatic nerve. Most men wouldn't survive a wound like that. Marvin did. He carried the pain for the rest of his life, disguising the limp that followed with quiet pride and iron discipline. When Hollywood discovered him, they didn't find an actor pretending to be dangerous. They found a man who was. Marvin's movements were sharp, efficient, and economical, the way a real fighter moves when he knows violence isn't theatrical. It's final. Directors often said there was something different about him. When he played killers or soldiers, it wasn't performance, it was memory. His eyes held the weight of someone who had seen real blood. Off-screen, the stories about him became legend. During a shoot in Oregon, Marvin got into a bar fight with several lumberjacks and won. He showed up the next morning bruised and bleeding, but refused to delay filming. His co-stars admitted they were intimidated by his presence, not because he was loud or threatening, but because he didn't need to be. His stillness spoke louder than any shout. Lee Marvin's brand of toughness was raw, quiet, and deeply real. He didn't talk about bravery. He lived it every day. Beneath the gravelly voice and hard stare was a man who'd survived war, carried its ghosts, and somehow turned that pain into cinematic truth. 8. Steve McQueen, the king of cool who lived without fear. Steve McQueen wasn't Hollywood's idea of a rebel. He was one. His life read like a blueprint for survival. Abandoned by both parents and tossed between reform schools, McQueen grew up fighting for everything: food, respect, and freedom. By 14, he'd already run away, drifting across the country, stealing to survive, and learning that trust was a luxury. That raw independence would later define his every move. When he joined the Marines, his rebellious streak didn't disappear. It sharpened. He was demoted 7 times and even thrown in the brig for insubordination. But when a training accident sent a tank plunging into icy waters, McQueen dove in without hesitation, rescuing 5 fellow Marines from drowning. Beneath the swagger, there was a man who didn't talk about courage. He just acted on it. Hollywood tried to tame him, but McQueen thrived on danger. He performed nearly every stunt himself, against studio warnings and insurance bans. On The Great Escape, the only stunt he didn't do was the barbed wire fence jump, and only because producers physically stopped him. During the Sand Pebbles, he nearly drowned filming river scenes, and for the Towering Inferno, he insisted on running through live fire, terrifying stunt coordinators. Off-screen, McQueen's need for speed was just as real. He raced motorcycles and cars professionally, often under fake names so studios couldn't stop him. At the grueling 1970 Sebring race, he finished 2nd overall, driving with a cast on his broken foot. When he learned that Charles Manson's cult had listed him as a target, McQueen didn't panic. He simply began carrying a loaded Magnum everywhere he went. That was his version of security. Steve McQueen didn't chase danger for show. Danger was his oxygen. Every scar, every glare, every high-speed chase came from the same truth. He wasn't pretending to live on the edge. He was born there. 9. Charlton Heston, the warrior who outlasted pain. Charlton Heston didn't just play heroes. He embodied them, both on and off screen. Before he ever lifted the tablets as Moses or raced chariots in Ben-Hur, Heston was a World War II veteran, serving as a radio operator and aerial gunner in the Army Air Forces. That experience, the noise, the pressure, the danger, gave him a military discipline and endurance that would define his entire career. Unlike many of his peers, Heston never demanded special treatment. He carried himself with the quiet pride of a soldier who understood what real struggle felt like. During the 10 Commandments, he insisted on hoisting real stone tablets for hours, take after take, despite the strain on his shoulders. On The Greatest Story Ever Told, he tore a ligament during a stunt, got it wrapped during lunch, and returned to filming that same afternoon. But his greatest test came years later, long after the cameras stopped rolling. During the filming of The Conqueror, Heston and the cast were unknowingly exposed to radiation from nearby nuclear testing grounds, exposure that would later lead to cancer for nearly half the crew. When Heston himself was diagnosed, he endured surgery that removed one of his lungs. And yet, even as he battled cancer, he kept acting, performing demanding physical roles with the same intensity that made him a legend. What separated Heston from others wasn't just strength, it was purpose. He believed toughness wasn't about proving something to others, but about showing up, no matter how much it hurt. He once said, "The great battles in life aren't fought on camera. They're fought in silence when no one is watching." Charlton Heston's entire life proved that truth. He didn't act invincible. He was unyielding, a warrior in every sense. 10. Audie Murphy, the boy soldier who became a legend. If real toughness had a face, it would look like Audie Murphy's. Young, unassuming, and utterly fearless. Standing only 5 feet 5 and weighing barely 110 pounds, he didn't look like a warrior. But by the time he turned 21, he was the most decorated soldier in U.S. history, a living contradiction of appearance and power. Murphy grew up in poverty, the son of a sharecropper in Texas. At just 17, he lied about his age to join the army after Pearl Harbor, determined to fight. What followed was nothing short of mythic. In one legendary battle, Murphy single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers for over an hour, climbing onto a burning tank destroyer, firing its machine gun until he ran out of ammunition, and continuing to fight while wounded. His courage earned him the Medal of Honor and respect from every man who fought beside him. By the end of World War II, Murphy had killed or wounded more than 240 enemy soldiers and received 28 medals, including every American decoration for valor. When Life magazine featured him on its cover, Hollywood came calling. But even under the lights, he couldn't escape the war. He suffered from severe PTSD, slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, and fought private battles few understood. When he portrayed himself in To Hell and Back, the studio actually toned down his real-life heroics because audiences wouldn't believe how much he'd truly done. The truth was almost too extraordinary for fiction. Despite his fame, Murphy stayed humble, quiet, and protective, the kind of man whose stillness carried more weight than words. One witness once said, "He looked like a schoolboy, but in his eyes you saw something ancient, something you couldn't fake." Audie Murphy wasn't Hollywood tough. He was the definition of it. A hero who never sought glory, only duty. A man who survived hell, then carried it silently for the rest of his life. Today's action heroes might have stunt doubles, but these men were their own stunts. They didn't act brave. They were brave. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, their legacy still whispers one timeless truth. Real strength isn't shown on screen, it's earned off it.